In Fontaine's early years, it was known by a different name called Remuria. With most of its people situated at their capital city of Capitolium, it was ruled by the ancient god king named Remus. It started out when Remus arrived on Meropes, likely another ancient name for Fontaine, and he taught the people there how to build houses, farm, and appreciate music and art. Remus also conquered the other islands in the region and made the great dragon beneath the abyssal depths yield to him. After his conquest, he set out to build a perfect civilization and created a capital city, the Capitolium. Following this, the land of Remuria had a time of peace, and all life was good for the citizens. After some time, there were numerous prophecies roaming around its citizens, similar to the situation that the court of Fontaine is facing. The prophecy was that Remus's people would face the most utter destruction, and they would return to the primordial sea. Fearing this prophecy, Remus made plans to counter it, but in his effort, it only increased the possibility of the prophecy to happen. In the end, the land of Remuria, in all its glory, was destroyed by an inexorable storm, and Remus with it. But in its destruction, another god named Egeria appeared and united the divided tribes scattered across the region. She took over the duties of an archon and soon settled her people to her land, now known as Fontaine. With her guidance, oceanids and other domestic creatures grew fondly of the humans and cooperated in making Fontaine a grand place. Now, you might be wondering, when does the Narzissenkreuz Institute take place in this timeline? Actually, to be honest, the founding of the institute is still unknown, but it's highly likely that it took place shortly after Egeria became the Hydroarchon. As a gentle and caring god, Egeria may have thought of the idea of establishing an institute to help and care for orphans and appointing a director to manage the affairs inside. For its location, the Narzissenkreuz Institute was built on top of an ancient Remurian ruin, likely to remove the need of using building materials and preserve the history of the lost civilization of Remuria. As for what we already know, let's begin by jumping ahead to 500 years before the traveler wakes up. At this time in Fontaine, the appointed director was an oceanid named Elynas, and inside the institute, there were 4 children who would always play heroes and dragons together. Their names were Karl Ingold, Emmanuel Guillotine, Basil Elton, and Dwight Lasker. These names were all documented by the artifact set, Merchaussee Hunter, so it's a highly reliable source of information. Of these 4 children, Emmanuel Guillotine would always play as the hero, and Karl Ingold the Jabberwock Dragon. As they aged, Emmanuel Guillotine, who often played as the hero, joined the Merchaussee Phantom and gained superior combat skills, having defeated a champion duelist named Marfisa. And Karl Ingold, who played the Jabberwock Dragon, applied for a job and became a journalist. As for the other 2, Basil Elton joined the Fontaine Navy and became an admiral, and Dwight Lasker became a researcher and was appointed as the director of the Institute of Natural Philosophy. At the same time these 4 were making a name for themselves, the court of Fontaine had some issues regarding their territories. This included control over the Fleuve Cendre, which, in those days, was occupied by outlaws and illegal merchants. The Fleuve Cendre has some history with the people in the court of Fontaine, and the place was run by a man named Eduardo Baker. Eduardo Baker planned to make Fleuve Cendre an independent district and even form their own militia to protect its borders. Eduardo Baker was once just a tavern owner who had a wife and a son named Jacob. He was also the one who allowed the 2 sister magicians, Parsifal the Great and Josephine, to perform their shows when they were still starting their careers. He began to gain followers when he protected merchants from gangs and resolved the issues within the citizens of the Fleuve Cendre. Soon enough, he rose to become their outlaw leader and led a resistance against those in the court of Fontaine. However, tensions rose between the 2, and it resulted in the purge of the Fleuve Cendre. In the end, Eduardo Baker and his militia was beaten, and was one of those who was arrested. Following the purge, Eduardo and the rest of his people were exiled to Cimmeru, escorted by some members of the Maison Gardinage. But on their way there, some of Eduardo's militia rescued him and assembled at Mont Autumneki. From there, he and his militia captured the town of Bazan, taking its inhabitants and their mayor, a man named Renaud de Petrichor, as hostages. Soon enough, news of Eduardo Baker's escape reached the court of Fontaine. Not knowing what actions to do, Karl Ingold volunteered to go to Busan and have peace talks with the outlaw leader. However, it ended pretty badly as negotiations broke down and the Merchaussee Phantom encircled the town, hence the beginning of the siege of Busan. During this time, it was Emmanuel Guillotine who led the siege, alongside Marfisa, the champion duelist. After a long and bitter fight, the town of Puzon was burned, with Eduardo Baker and Renaud de Petrichor both dead. The orphans caused by the infamous siege were then sent to the Narzissenkreuz Institute. From there, 4 of the orphans became friends. They were Jacob Baker, son of Eduardo Baker, René de Petrichor, son of Renaud de Petrichor, Alain, and a girl named Marianne. These 4 friends went on to play Heroes and Dragons, similar to what the original 4 children once played. Shortly enough, another child named Carter Skurbius entered the Narzissenkreuz Institute. As for his role in this story, we will know in the next chapter. Anyways, after the siege of Puzon, 3 of the 4 original children resigned from their positions. Emmanuel Guillotine had developed PTSD and retired from his position in the Marchese Phantom, setting out for a peaceful life. Karl Ingalls had quit journalism and decided to become an adventurer. Basil Elton, the admiral of the Fontaine Navy, also retired and was selected to become the vice director of the Narzissenkreuz Institute alongside Lyris. As for Dwight Lasker, he was still continuing his job as a director. Eventually, a disaster struck the whole of Teyvat. It was the Cataclysm. 7 regions of Teyvat have different experiences of this well-known event, and for the region of Fontaine, it started when the sea beast, Elynas, was summoned by Rheindotter and suddenly appeared in the area. Due to safety concerns, it was decided that the Narzissenkreuz Institute and Institute of Natural Philosophy would cease operations. Director Lyris would accompany Egeria and the other Lockfolk to Sumeru to fight on the front lines, while Vice Director Basil Elson would come out of retirement to sail her armada aboard the Sponsian in pursuit of Elynas. However, before leaving, Basil entrusted the children of the Institute into the care of her old friends. Emmanuel Guillotine would take custody of Alain and Marianne, while Karl Ingle would take care of Jacob and René. As for Carter Skurbius, it isn't known who took custody to his care. Basil and her crew would pursue Elynas for 35 days before being killed, with half of her ship, the Sponsian, ending up inside Elynas' body. Eventually, Elynas did die, but his consciousness remained bound to his body with the ability to perceive anything happening within it. Throughout this ordeal, Elynas' blood spilled out into Fontaine's waters, polluting it, which was described as filled with pain and hatred. After the Cataclysm, Director Lyris went missing while Egeria lost her life and was reduced to a pool of Amrita. Creator Lord Rukkhadevata bound her consciousness to Teyvat with the help of the great bird Simurg's sacrifice. When Elynas' blood spilled onto Fontaine's waters, the Oceanids couldn't bear to remain there any longer and went on a pilgrimage through the desert to see the remains of their fallen god, but moved on with disappointment after seeing what she had become. With the loss of its director and its vice-director, the Narzissenkreuz Institute was forced to disband and was eventually swallowed up by the waters in the first flooding period of Fontaine. The Institute of Natural Philosophy was also submerged, which forced Dwight Lasker to relocate to a different area. Following the aftermath of Elynas' death, Karl Ingle took both Jacob and René along with him to explore the deserts of Sumeru, specifically to the Girdle of the Sands. During these adventures, René and Jacob discovered the records of Khaenri'ah, learning much about their technology and the concepts behind abyssal power. Unfortunately, Jacob eventually fell sick from malnutrition during their adventures and was slowly dying. As a last resort, René used the power of the abyss to heal Jacob, transforming him into a neo-human, a superhuman being with incredible strength and no need of sustenance. Following Jacob's revival, René decided to dig a little deeper about Khaenri'ah's records. From this, René created his own version of a world formula, which is a set of equations that predicts the future. However, despite his intelligent idea, he found out that the future he predicted will end in another flooding and disaster in Fontaine, with no one surviving. Eventually, Karl, Jacob, and René returned back to Fontaine, with René planning to meet with Alain and discuss with him the things he had discovered. While Karl, René, and Jacob were all busy adventuring in Sumeru, Emmanuel and Dwight visited Basil Elton's grave, where Emmanuel introduced his adopted son Alain and encouraged Dwight to let his son join the Institute of Natural Philosophy. When Alain was admitted into the Institute, he began pursuing research into artificial intelligence and the power sources used by Khaenri'ah war machines and primal constructs. This was when Alain invented the Arche system and introduced the energies of Ouija and Pneuma. This impressed Dwight Lasker, thus increasing the Institute's investments in his work. He also appointed Carter as Alain's new assistant and created a lab dedicated for his personal research. While Elynas was enjoying his new job, Marianne joined the Merchase Phantom as a secret agent. After a while, Rene and Jakob returned to Fontaine and took some time to explore the ancient ruins left behind by Remuria, including books that make mention of the fortuna they had seen back then, as well as the cyclical nature in which civilizations rise and fall. Rene noted how similar this is to his own world formula, but in using that information to refine his own formula, he discovered that there will be no new civilization born after his current one ends. He decided that the only way to escape this fate would be to introduce outside variables. He found with these records something called the seal of chemical marriage, which is the alchemical concept of two contrary substances or principles being combined. Hoping to gain access to more research material, Rene and Jakob met with Elynas to share with him about what they learned in their adventures. However, both disclosed the fact about Jakob's neo-human status to Elynas. Nevertheless, due to Elynas' recommendation, both of them were soon admitted into the Institute of Natural Philosophy. Working as a team in their laboratory, the four managed to successfully conduct research into prime energy machinery, with Elynas and Rene intending to use the characteristics of Uzia and Numa to construct a new kinetic core for Fontaine's alternative power source. However, as time passed, Elynas' genius and his distrust of his new companions made his relationship with Rene and Jakob sour. Still terrified of the world formula, Rene decided to continue his plans of creating more neo-humans which could potentially survive Fontaine's coming destruction. So he conducted research on Elynas' remains behind Elynas' back and performed an experiment on Carter, who was under an unknown type of illness, likely Elazar. Thinking that Rene could repeat the process he once did for Jakob, he harnessed the power of the Abyss and released it to Carter's body. However, Carter's body could not withstand the abyssal power, and shortly died after. Eventually, Elynas finds out about their secret and cuts ties with both Rene and Jakob. With Carter's death, Elynas was inspired to create a robot dog guardian for Marianne named Seymour. It was Carter's idea of a thinking camera which got to Elynas and decided to make it in his memory. It would also serve as a companion for Marianne while Elynas was occupied in the Institute. After Elynas and Rene cut ties with one another, Rene still continued to finish his research on the neo-humans and world formula, and ultimately decided to share this prophecy and plans with a select few people within the Institute, going on to establish a group which they named the Narzissenkreuz Ordo, or the Order of the Narzissenkreuz, whose sole aim was to combat the upcoming apocalypse. Fun trivia, this was the name of the dragon in the world quest, the Narzissenkreuz Adventure. To gain more knowledge in their experiments, the Narzissenkreuz Ordo ventures out to the corpse of Elynas and feeds Jakob Elynas' flesh and blood to strengthen him. Surprisingly, the Oceanid Lyris, director of the Narzissenkreuz Institute, who was claimed to have been missing, have returned to the now submerged institute and is met by Rene and Jakob. Both of them convince Lyris to join the Narzissenkreuz Ordo, with Rene suggesting that he and Lyris would merge both of their consciousnesses. At the end, Rene dissolves himself first by merging with Lyris' body and consciousness as a foundation, eventually creating the Master. This Master would be the one to create Caterpillar and the Doomsday Clock situated in the Institute of Natural Philosophy. In due time, Dwight Lasker received a report regarding abnormal activities within the Narzissenkreuz Ordo, which was hidden within the Institute of Natural Philosophy, so he entrusted his old friend, Emmanuel Guillotine, to conduct further investigations into the secret organization. However, he was later captured, dissolved, and was absorbed into the Master consciousness. From the victims' memories, the Master learned that Elynas had introduced simple logic trees for Clockwork Mecha to execute commands which caught the Master's attention. Seeing as a battle could take place, and Jakob not wanting to fight both Elynas and Marianne due to their lifelong friendship, the Master thought of using the Book of Revealing to show Elynas the calculated destruction after the Cataclysm and the upcoming apocalypse. Trying to persuade Elynas to join their order in saving Fontaine, the Master and Elynas met with one another, with the former proposing that Elynas would lend his high intelligence, making him a part of the Master. However, Elynas refused the offer and left. The Master was disappointed by Elynas' decision, but still provided a place for him in Marianne's future. Eventually, the Master and the Narzissenkreuz Order had a battle with the Marchasi hunters, including Elynas, Marianne, and Seymour within the body of Elynas. It was a long-fought battle, but by the end, the hunters defeated the Master and the Narzissenkreuz Order. As a final goodbye, Rena's consciousness within the Master told Elynas that he would surely return to save all souls, even after many years. The Narzissenkreuz Ordo, in all their plans and vile experiments, was halted by Elynas, Marianne, and the Marchasi hunters. This then marks the end of the video, but I'm hoping to expand more of these topics in different videos. There are a lot more subplots happening within this timeline, such as Remuria's history, Murphisa and the Sister Magicians, Basil Elton and Elynas' clash, the continuation of Rene's world formula, the sad story of Carr's death, the tale behind Marianne, and the explanation of characters in the world quest, the Narzissenkreuz adventure. I would like to create separate videos regarding these subplots for a more complete version and analysis. But anyway, that's all I have for this episode. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. So, as usual, my name is KlemenTime. Till the next one, be safe, stay tuned.